Parents of Reddit, what is the most embarrassing thing your toddler said out loud in public? My child isn't old enough to talk yet, but when I was little and we were on holiday, my dad used to get me to say I was younger than I was so we could get into theme parks cheaper. When we were on our way back, the gentleman at passport control asked me how old I was, and I turned to my dad and said, "How old am I today, Daddy?" When my cousin was about 2, she still occasionally took baths with her mom, my aunt. One night we're at their house for dinner, out of nowhere, she blurts out at my uncle, "Daddy, you got hair on your pee-pee, too." And that was the first and only time in my life I nearly required the Heimlich maneuver. There is a man who lives in our village with no arms, Mr. M. His children attended my son's nursery, so he has met him many times. We were in a packed doctor's waiting room one day and Mr. M came in. "Son," at full volume, "look mummy. There's Mr. M that I told you about. He has no arms. Look. Look." Pointing at this point, the whole waiting room, in true British style, have turned their heads in the opposite direction to Mr. M, and are actively trying not to look while similarly avoiding eye contact with me, and the disrespectful small child who draws attention to people's disabilities. Me, "Ah yes, that is Mr. M. We see him at school, don't we?" "Son, yeah, he came in to talk to us one day. Oh gosh, what is coming next? He drives his car with his feet. Please don't say more, he is totally awesome." Massive sigh of relief, "Yeah dude, he really is." Turns to the lady behind us in line at the grocery store and says, "Lady, you're fat and your dog is ugly." Edit, wow, this blew up. The lady was fat but the dog was in no way ugly. No dogs are ugly as far as I'm concerned. It was one of those wiener dogs that are just really long. I felt bad for the dog. During a private Remembrance Day, Armistice Day, ceremony with veterans, my 3-year-old soiled her diaper. I changed her in a back room, and when we came out, it was the moment of silence. She slammed the door and yelled to all the vets, "I just had a big poo. And it had peanuts in it." As a veteran, that would have made my month. I'd be telling everyone about that. That is straight up grunt humor. I would be hating all the sadness until that moment, then it'd be a great time. Remember people, vets aren't made of glass, even the old or injured ones. We live for gallows humor, dark humor, and fart jokes. Lay it on us? Was eating at a Chinese restaurant when the waiter and the cook were having a discussion in Chinese. 8-year-old daughter yells out why they speaking Spanish. Embarrassing to say the least. Went back a couple of months later and the waiter remembered us cause after taking our orders. He says I'll return and delay. Damn. You know what though? Props to your mom for taking her out of there. Her bladder control must have been heroic, and once the kid says something like that, the urge to cry is so real. One time my kid pointed out as the pizza delivery man walked up how big his nose was, and without thinking I just blurted out, "So, you've got a bobble head?" So my kid got offended and I made the delivery man laugh, but I don't think I taught kid much that day. My friend's daughter, 2.5 years/0, saw another kid in the grocery store with a toy truck, and out of nowhere says, "I want that fucking truck." In an angry tone. Not the funniest thing to read, I know, but we've been saying that in a baby voice for the last few years and it always cracks us up. My cousin called a wardrobe a fucking wardrobe for around a year. The wardrobe had fallen on her younger sister, thankfully not doing any lasting damage, and her dad, hearing the bang, ran into the room and screamed that fucking wardrobe. My cousin assumed that was its correct name. I did something like this. I grew up in the 80s in a small town with very few pook. My dad and I went out for lunch one day and our waitress was black. I was thrilled. I kept poking my dad and telling him in a loud voice, "Dad. Dad. It's Roz. Dad. Roz from Night Court is our waitress." He was very embarrassed. Years later I lived in the same town, and had an employee who was a very dark-skinned black man. We worked a Christmas in a retail shop together. One day the store is packed with people and kids and he says to me, "Want to see something funny?" And I say sure, of course. He walks by this mom and toddler that she's carrying and waves at the little girl. Her eyes widen and then proceed to follow him around the store. Whipping her head around, wide-eyed, she will not let him out of her sight. He comes back over to me and says, "I always can tell when I'm the first black person a kid has seen. It was so cute and magical." Disclaimer, this was not my toddler, but a toddler said this to me while I was waiting in the grocery line: "I have a vagina and new party shoes." Really, what else do you need? One of the funniest things was when my sister's son was learning vagina and penis. He would spend a few minutes a day just saying "Aunt K, no penis, Uncle J penis." Family events were fun. He would point to someone and say "has penis." And if it was a woman he would shake his head, give a look like "that's rough buddy," and say "no penis." 4-year-old son was misbehaving in a store, and I told him if he didn't control himself we were going to leave. He escalated, and I picked him up and carried him through the entire store. He was surprisingly putting up little fight. As we passed the checkout lanes he loudly says, "Hey mister, put me down." I didn't hesitate, didn't make eye contact with anyone, just turned beet red and kept marching out the door. I've thought of this exact situation before, and it left me wondering, if an especially vigilant bystander were to get police involved, how do you prove it's your kid? Would you have to go all the way to maternity/paternity test, or would things like baby pictures plus SSC/birth certificate work? I know it's a weirdly specific situation, but this is one of those weird ones that hits me 10 minutes before falling asleep and keeps me up. My husband's father had to keep a picture of him with my husband as an infant in the hospital on him at all times. He's a very dark-skinned man and my husband could almost pass as a white baby. He got stopped several times by people, including police, because a black man with a white-looking baby was very suspicious. My best friend is gay. He and his partner have lovingly been called the gays at our house after a slip-up. When calling them the guys came out as the gays, which they thought was funny and began to call themselves that. It caught on after a while. Picking up dinner one night at the grocery store, my daughter asked if they were coming over to eat with us, as they do once or twice a week. My best friend tends to tease my daughter who, at 5, can be sensitive to it. I said no and she replied by loudly exclaiming for all to hear, "Thank God, because I hate the gays." After watching 101 Dalmatians the day before, I was grocery shopping with my daughter. We crossed paths with an old lady in a somewhat dirty church suit and tons of makeup with sloppy red lipstick. My daughter points at her and says, "Daddy, that's a bad lady." The lady did kind of look like Cruella de Vil. My mother always loved to remind me that when I was about 3 to 4 we were at KFC eating and a fat guy with a beard came in. I thought he was Colonel Sanders because I was 3 and stupid. I couldn't actually say Colonel Sanders, so I just yelled, "Look Mom, the fat man." A bunch of times. Austin, Texas Trail of Lights. We come upon this display of armadillos. I ask my 5-year-old, "What are those?" Loudly, she replies, "Mexicans." I wanted to crawl under a rock. It was either this or the time she proudly announced, "My daddy pees standing up and farts." Took my 3-year-old to Disney World. Of course, after about an hour in the park, both I and the offspring have to go to the bathroom. We head off to one of the main bathrooms right next to the castle. I let the boy go first. He performed a nice quick dump complete with the customary good job from me as we were still reinforcing the potty training mantras. Then I of course sit down and perform my own glorious number 2 complete with a nice squeaky door fart which had the offspring in hysterics. At this point the child starts saying in a voice that can only be described as booming, "Good job, Daddy. You're the best pooper I know." This of course led to chuckles from the long line of stalls populated by other fathers. The chuckles ended up turning into outright laughter. I was so proud of my pooping abilities. Well, I'm somewhat shameless, so I clean up and go wash my hands to find that I'm now getting the nods of approval from everyone in the can who heard the interchange. I was the best pooper at Disney World that day, and internally embarrassed and entertained at the same time. At the grocery store with my boys, 2 and 3. Suddenly, without any context, the 3-year-old broke his silence to scream at the cashier, "Mama's wiener is missing." Silver. Thank you, kind stranger. My son just started doing this. He's 3, and I made the mistake of throwing him in the shower with me recently when we were short on time. Long story short, had to explain to him that girls do not have wieners and mommy is a girl. For the rest of the day, no matter where or when, everyone we encountered heard mommy lost her wiener somewhere in Target. No idea where that came from. I guess we do shop at Target quite a bit. I was in Target with my 4-year-old boy twins. One has a nervous habit of grabbing his parts. I quietly said to him, "Let go, hands off dude," and he yells at the top of his lungs, "But mama, my penis won't go down." I don't think I've ever left Target so fast. My son went through a phase where he would announce when he had a boner. Now he's in a phase where he constantly rubs/pinches his nipples. He will not stop. My mom used to yell at me as a small kid for playing with my left nipple all the time. She said it would get bigger if I didn't stop. I'm now 20 years old and my left nipple is noticeably larger than my right. feelspadman.jpg. Edit. Wow, did not expect the world to find my enlarged nipple to be so interesting. For the PMs, yes, I am a dude, and no, you cannot have pics of my chest, you weirdos. Not really embarrassing, but my son once announced to daycare that I had died. It was a severe shock to them when I picked him up. Now my niece once announced at a family dinner that she wanted a fuck, loudly. We all turned and looked at this little 3-year-old, and her mother said she'd work on speech therapy with her as she handed her daughter a fork. Edit. As it slowly comes back to me, I think he cried too, just to underscore the point. It's been almost 13 years, so the memory is hazy. The staff were very distraught. Not as sad, but my daughter announced at daycare that I was pregnant. I showed up and all the teachers were congratulating me. I was most decidedly not pregnant and have no clue why she decided to announce that I was. Kids will say things for attention, not knowing the consequences of it. My mom said I did that a lot so. My sister used to tell lies for the attention all the time. For example, when she was in kindergarten, it was always some tale about how badly the other kids misbehaved and threw blocks but didn't get punished even when they hit someone. My mom asked the teacher about these alleged incidents during parent-teacher night, only to be greeted by confusion as none of it had happened. My mom had a little chat with my sister, and she quit telling lies about things like that at school. She did however keep telling them at home, and that I was beating up on her, wouldn't share toys, etc. My mother always believed her and would scream at me that I was the oldest, so it was my job to be nice to her. I eventually lost all interest in playing with her as she always had to have her way or she'd go tell my mom something made up to get me in trouble. Unfortunately, the consequence is that to this day we're not close as adults. At some point I really stopped wanting to have anything to do with her as kids since all she did was gloat when I got yelled at. Even as adults, she's had to continuously be my mother's favorite, to the point of getting jealous and upset at me if I take up too much of my parents' time. When I was little, under 5, my dad would jokingly ask if I wanted a cold beer. I would always respond with no. Until one day when we were in the grocery store, he asked if I wanted anything, to which I replied, a cold beer, while we were standing in line. I am Mexican and once I told my grandma that I wanted a Coronita, so, Little Crown in Spanish, but like the beer brand Corona, so my grandma goes and buys Little Me, a plastic tiara, and when she handed it to me I loudly stated no. I want an ice-cold Little Crown. My mom was mortified, my grandma in shock, and to this day it's my dad's favorite story of Little Me. Lol, my son used to do that when anyone would sing. All done. All done. Ha ha, oh, sweetie, I was just singing, I'm not going anywhere. No, I meant I'm done with that shrieking caterwaul you mistakenly call singing, and you can get going right the hell off of my stage. Me and my 3-year-old were at my mom's house, and to get her to leave I told her, come on, we have to go home and take a shower. To make her laugh I said we need a shower because our bums are stinky. Later when we got home in a full elevator, my daughter turns to me and says, Mom, you need to shower because your bum is stinky. I was mortified. Nah, I think the kid just wanted to make her mom laugh. Earlier the mom had said that and made her laugh, and the mom probably laughed too. So the kid figures repeating it will lead to another round of laughter. I remember having similar trains of thought when I was little. Making your parents laugh is super rewarding at that age, so kids will inevitably repeat stuff that they have reason to think their parents find funny. My daughter says plenty of embarrassing things. She told someone I had a mustache recently, I have a barely visible lady stash, thank you very much, while laughing maniacally. But the most recent embarrassment was this: met up with a friend and his girlfriend with their 3-year-old. He has some kind of nerve palsy that made one of his eyes droopy. He had a surgery on it and it's a lot better, but you can still tell. My daughter and their son played well together for hours. Then as we were leaving, she pokes him and says, as loud as possible, "Hey, what's wrong with your eye?" To which he sweetly said nothing. Not mine, but my aunt was pregnant with her second kid when they were going to the grocery store. Her son was probably 4 at the time, and had recently found out that he was going to have a new brother/sister. So it was fresh in his mind. As they were walking into the store, a black family was walking out with their baby girl, and my cousin points at that baby and says, "I don't want one like that, mommy." My aunt quickly says he means he wants a brother. That cover probably didn't save her that much, but I probably wouldn't have been able to even come up with that in the moment. My 3-year-old, normally sweet and very empathetic, was being a total turd in Target. As we're running around trying to get out, she sees someone with an obvious birth defect stocking the makeup shelves. Before we could whisk her away, she shouts, "Look at his tiny arms. Tiny T-Rex arms." She was so excited for this guy, who was not at all amused by her. Another time, walking through the mall, she points at a store and shouts, "That's where I got my Hello Titty, my Hello Shitty, my shoes." I was laughing hysterically, but she was so embarrassed she cried. Edited for clarity. I took my daughter into the men's bathroom in a supermarket as she had to go. Went in the cubicle, she done her business, I helped clean up, then we came out. I went over to the sinks to wash my hands and she pointed at a guy peeing in the urinal. "Daddy, that man has a penis like you. He has a little penis and you have a big penis." I scooped her up and we left quick. I felt so bad for that guy getting called out like that by a wee girl. Frown? My son was 2 and thought every black man was his dad. He was away for the military a while, so when we were at Boston Market he called another random stranger daddy. And ran to him and hugged him. Ha ha ha, the guy actually picked him up and said, "I'm not your dad but hey buddy." I was mortified but couldn't stop laughing. My niece used to do this to random men at Target and the grocery store. She was 3 and would wave at them from down the aisle and scream, "Hi dada. Hi." If she was not in the cart she would run and hug their leg. She didn't care if they were with their own kids, wife, whoever. Her father was not in the military, however. He was at home. My sister got some very bad looks from lots of wives/girlfriends of these random men. My son came home from kindergarten with his backpack full of canned food. When pressed about the issue, he confidently stated that he had told the teacher he was hungry and we didn't have any food at home. They had sent him home with the donations for those in need. We got him to return the food the next day. It's a funny story we tell now, but talk about embarrassed. You are not alone on this one. My friend's son told his teachers they don't have a turkey for Thanksgiving, so they sent him home with a voucher for a turkey. His mom had to explain they were just serving ham and not needy. When my sister was little she didn't understand the food drive concept. My mom sent her to school with canned soup to donate and she came home with Kraft macaroni and boxed mashed potatoes. She loves some mashed potatoes, smiley face. My mom had her return them the next day. Sister was salty. Not a parent, but when my family and I were on vacation in Yellowstone/Custer's last stand, there was a Native American man dressed as a warrior doing a photo shoot. My little brother, about 3 at the time, yells out loud, "Dad, Terry's still one left." The man was a good sport and started laughing. Even got a picture with him later in the day. So this is something I said as a toddler, apparently. I was developmentally delayed, so had to go to a child therapist until I was 5. When I was about 4, we were in the waiting room with a bunch of other kids and teenagers, and their parents. I was walking around, minding my own business. I was pretty nonverbal, part of the reason I was in therapy, so generally didn't talk. I suddenly stopped in front of this one teenager. I point to her face and scream, "Face ugly." My mom is mortified. Not only is it a terrible thing to say, I said it to a teenager who was already in therapy. She pulling me and chastising me. Dragon meme, that is an ugly thing to say. But the damage was done. I was in Costco and my son, who was about 5 at the time, ran up to me, grabbed my hand and started pulling me towards the next aisle. Dad. Dad. Look. Real ninjas. Whilst pointing at 2 women in full burqas. When I had a mohawk, a little boy once pointed to me and said dinosaur. That was the best compliment I've ever received. Or that reminds me of the time I was working at a record store. I had pink hair in pigtails. A mother holding her little girl stepped up to the register to check out. The little girl whispers something in her mom's ear. Mom says to her, "Well, you should tell her that." The little girl was too shy and buried her face in her mom's neck. Her mom says to me, she says she thinks you look like a beautiful princess. Best compliment ever.